She was only 8 years old when she got lost in a Montana blizzard and stumbled through the snow into what looked like a fairy tale cottage, warm, glowing, impossibly perfect. But the little girl who thought she'd found shelter from the storm had actually discovered something far more dangerous. A root cellar beneath the floorboards holding $270 million in cash, gold, and secrets that powerful people had killed to bury half a century ago. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The mountains of western Montana don't forgive mistakes. They don't care if you're 8 or 80, rich or poor, brave or terrified. When the winter storms roll down from the peaks like angry gods, they take what they want and leave the rest to freeze. Emma Carter learned that truth the hard way on a December afternoon when the sky turned the color of old bruises and the wind started to howl like something alive and hungry. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how a third grader ended up alone in a whiteout, stumbling toward a cabin that shouldn't exist, we need to go back 3 days earlier, to a small house on the edge of Pine Ridge, where Emma lived with her father David, in a place so quiet you could hear the snow falling. Their home wasn't much. A 2-bedroom rental with drafty windows and a furnace that coughed and wheezed like an old man with pneumonia. The kitchen table wobbled unless you shoved a folded napkin under one leg. The bathroom door didn't quite close all the way. And the living room, well, it was mostly empty, except for a worn couch that had seen better decades and a television so old it still had a DVD player built in. But it was theirs, and for Emma, that meant everything. David Carter was 34 years old but looked older. 2 years of single parenting, financial stress and grief had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there when his wife Sarah was alive. He worked as a wilderness guide, leading hunting parties and tourists through the backcountry during the busy seasons. The pay was inconsistent. Some months were good, most weren't. Since Sarah's death from a sudden brain aneurysm, David had been drowning slowly, quietly, in the kind of debt that doesn't announce itself with phone calls, but just accumulates like snow on a roof until one day the whole structure collapses. He owed 3 months of back rent. The truck needed new tires. Emma's winter coat was 2 sizes too small, but he kept telling himself she could make it through one more season. He never told Emma how bad things were. She was 8. She'd already lost her mother. She didn't need to carry his fear, too. Emma was small for her age, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and her mother's green eyes, the kind that seemed to notice everything. She was quiet at school, but not shy, thoughtful in a way that sometimes startled adults. Her teacher, Mrs. Morrison, had mentioned at the last parent-teacher conference that Emma had an unusual imagination. She writes stories about lost kingdoms and hidden doors, Mrs. Morrison had said with a gentle smile. Very creative. Sometimes she seems to live more in her head than in the classroom. David had nodded, not sure if that was a compliment or a concern. The truth was, Emma did live in her head a lot. She read constantly, anything she could find. Library books, old magazines, the backs of cereal boxes. She made up elaborate games where the hallway became an enchanted forest and the backyard was a dragon's lair. She drew pictures of castles and talking animals and doors that led to other worlds. It was her way of coping, David suspected, her way of escaping a world that had taken her mother away without warning, without fairness, without mercy. On the morning of December 19th, David was scrambling eggs in their tiny kitchen when his phone rang. The number wasn't saved, but he answered anyway. These days he answered every call. You never knew which one might be work. "This David Carter?" a gruff voice asked. "Speaking. Name's Holland, Jim Holland. I'm up from Texas with 2 buddies. We want to do a 3-day elk hunt starting tomorrow. Our original guide just cancelled on us. You available?" David glanced at Emma, who sat at the wobbly table drawing in her notebook. Tomorrow was December 20th. School was out for winter break. He'd promised Emma they'd decorate their sad little Christmas tree together, maybe drive into town for hot chocolate. But the rent was due in 9 days, and Jim Holland was offering $1,200 for 3 days of work. "Yeah," David said, throat tight. I'm available." He made arrangements with Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor who lived 2 houses down. She was 76, kind, and lonely enough that she actually seemed to enjoy having Emma around. She'd watch Emma for the 3 days. David would pay her what he could when he got back. That evening, David sat Emma down on the couch. The space heater hummed in the corner, fighting against the December cold seeping through the walls. "Bug," he said, using his nickname for her. "I've got to take a job tomorrow. 3 days up in the high country. Mrs. Peterson's going to look after you." Emma's face fell. "But you said we'd decorate the tree." "I know. I'm sorry. We'll do it when I get back, I promise." "You always have to work," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. The words hit him like a punch. "I know, but this job, it's important. It means we can pay rent, maybe get you that new coat you need." Emma picked at the frayed edge of the couch cushion. "Mama used to say December was magic time." David's chest tightened. "Your mama was right. It doesn't feel magic anymore." He pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. "I know, Bug, I know." The next morning came cold and grey. David packed his gear while Emma ate cereal in silence. He drove her to Mrs. Peterson's house, a small place that smelled like mothballs and cinnamon. Mrs. Peterson greeted them at the door in a cardigan and slippers, her white hair pinned back with bobby pins. "Don't you worry about a thing," she told David, patting his arm. "Emma and I will have a grand time. We'll bake cookies and watch Christmas movies." Emma stood in the doorway, her 2 small coats zipped up, her backpack over one shoulder. "Be good," David said, kneeling down to her level. "Listen to Mrs. Peterson. No wandering off, no going outside alone. Promise me." "I promise," Emma said. He hugged her tight, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "I love you, Bug. I'll be back before you know it." "Love you too, Daddy." He stood, grabbed his pack, and headed for the truck. He didn't look back. If he had, he might have seen the sadness in Emma's eyes. He might have noticed the way she watched him drive away like she was memorizing the moment. He might have stayed. Mrs. Peterson meant well. She truly did. But by mid-afternoon on that first day, she'd dozed off in her recliner with a mystery novel open on her lap. The television murmured softly in the background, some black-and-white movie from the 1950s. The cookies they'd baked sat cooling on the counter. Emma sat at the kitchen table, colouring half-heartedly. She glanced at Mrs. Peterson. The old woman's mouth hung slightly open, her chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of sleep. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall, soft fat flakes drifting down like feathers. Emma stood quietly and walked to the window. The world beyond the glass looked like something from a storybook, white and pristine and silent. The woods at the edge of Mrs. Peterson's property stretched dark and inviting, and that's when she saw it, a flash of white moving between the trees. Emma pressed her face to the cold glass. There, just at the tree line, was a rabbit, but not just any rabbit. It was pure white, bright against the dark pines, and huge, bigger than any rabbit she'd ever seen. It paused, turned, and looked directly at her. For a moment, girl and rabbit stared at each other. Then the rabbit bounded deeper into the woods. Emma's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. Every story she'd ever read came flooding back. White rabbits meant something. They led to wonderlands, to magic, to adventure. Her mother used to read her Alice in Wonderland, doing funny voices for all the characters. "Follow the white rabbit, Alice. Follow it down the hole." Emma looked back at Mrs. Peterson, still sleeping soundly. She looked at the door. She'd promised her father she wouldn't go outside alone. She'd promised. But the rabbit was right there, and it was just the woods behind the house. She wouldn't go far, just a quick look, just to see. She pulled on her too small coat, grabbed her knit hat, and slipped out the back door. The cold hit her immediately. The temperature had dropped since morning, now hovering somewhere in the low 20s. Her breath came out in white puffs. The snow crunched softly under her sneakers, not boots, sneakers, because her boots had a hole in the sole and her father hadn't been able to afford new ones yet. The rabbit was maybe 30 yards ahead, visible through the falling snow. It paused again, looked back at her, then hopped forward. Emma followed. The woods were beautiful. The pines stood tall and dark, their branches heavy with snow. Everything was quiet, muffled, like the world was holding its breath. Emma's footsteps sounded too loud in the stillness. The rabbit moved ahead, always just visible, always just out of reach. Emma followed deeper into the trees. She didn't notice when the snow started falling harder. She didn't notice when the wind picked up, bending the tops of the pines. She didn't notice when the light began to change, the afternoon sun disappearing behind thick clouds. She only noticed the rabbit, white and perfect and magical, always ahead, until suddenly it wasn't. Emma stopped, breathing hard. She turned in a slow circle. The rabbit was gone. The woods pressed in around her, suddenly unfamiliar. The trees all looked the same. Which way had she come? Where was Mrs. Peterson's house? "Hello?" she called out. The wind swallowed her voice. That's when the fear started, small at first, just a flutter in her stomach. She turned around, started walking back the way she thought she'd come. But nothing looked right. The snow was falling so thick now she could barely see 10 feet ahead. The wind whipped the flakes sideways, stinging her cheeks. "Mrs. Peterson!" Emma shouted. "Daddy!" No answer. Just wind. She walked faster, then started to run. Branches snagged her coat. Snow filled her sneakers, soaking her socks. Her hands, gloveless because she'd lost her gloves weeks ago, were already going numb. Emma ran until her lungs burned and her legs ached. Then she stopped, gasping, and realized with creeping horror that she had no idea where she was. The woods looked exactly the same in every direction. The snow had covered any tracks she might have left. She was lost, completely, utterly lost. The fear that had been small and fluttery exploded into full panic. Emma's breathing came in short, sharp gasps. Her chest felt tight. Tears streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks. "Help!" she screamed into the storm. "Somebody help me!" The wind howled back. She tried to pull out her phone, the old flip phone her dad had given her for emergencies. Her fingers were so cold she could barely grip it. She flipped it open. No signal. Out here, deep in the back country, there was never signal. Emma pressed the buttons anyway, desperate, but the screen just blinked, no service. Then the battery died. The screen went black. Emma stood alone in a Montana blizzard with a dead phone, no gloves, inadequate shoes, and absolutely no idea which direction would lead her to safety. She was 8 years old, and she was going to die out here. The thought came clear and terrible. I'm going to die like Mama did. Suddenly, unfairly, before I'm ready. She sank down against a tree trunk, pulled her knees to her chest and sobbed. Time stopped meaning anything. Minutes blurred into hours. The storm grew worse, the wind so strong it nearly knocked her over when she tried to stand. The temperature plummeted. Emma's fingers had gone from numb to painful to numb again. Her toes felt like blocks of ice in her wet sneakers. She knew about hypothermia from a unit they'd done in school. She knew the symptoms: shivering, confusion, drowsiness. She was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Her thoughts were getting fuzzy, dreamlike. She tried to keep moving, stumbling through the white nothing, but her legs felt heavy and distant, like they belonged to someone else. The sky was darkening. Night was coming. If she was still out here when full dark fell, that would be it. No one survived a Montana winter night in a blizzard without shelter. Emma fell. The snow was soft, almost inviting. It would be so easy to just lie here, to close her eyes, to sleep. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Emma, baby, you're stronger than you know. You're my brave girl. Emma pushed herself up, took another step, then another. She didn't see the light at first. Her eyes were nearly frozen shut, crusted with ice and snow. But gradually, impossibly, she became aware of a warm glow ahead. Gold and soft, like candlelight. She blinked hard, forcing her eyes open. Through the swirling snow, maybe 20 feet away, stood a cabin. But not just any cabin. This looked like something from a fairy tale, from the stories her mother used to read. It was small and charming, built from dark logs with white trim around the windows. The roof was steep and covered in snow that looked almost decorative, like frosting on a gingerbread house. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. Warm light glowed from the windows, casting golden squares on the white ground. Emma stared. This couldn't be real. There were no cabins out here. Her father would have mentioned it. This was wilderness, protected forest. No one lived this deep in the woods. But there it was, solid and real and impossible. She stumbled toward it, each step an agony of cold and exhaustion. She reached the front door, a heavy wooden thing with iron hinges and a brass knocker shaped like a deer's head. Emma lifted the knocker with frozen fingers and let it fall. The sound echoed. She waited, shivering violently. No one came. She knocked again, harder. "Please!" she called out, her voice raw. "Please, I need help!" Still nothing. Emma tried the handle. It turned. The door swung open. Heat rushed out, blessed and overwhelming. Emma nearly collapsed from the relief of it. She stepped inside and pushed the door closed behind her, shutting out the screaming wind. The interior was like stepping into another time. The main room was small but perfectly arranged. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Oil lamps hung from the ceiling, their warm glow supplementing the firelight. The furniture was old-fashioned but beautiful. A rocking chair with embroidered cushions, a small sofa with carved wooden arms, a rug that looked hand-woven in patterns of red and gold. The walls were decorated with framed photographs and dried flowers. Everything was immaculate, not a speck of dust anywhere. And on the small table near the fireplace sat a bowl of soup, still steaming. Emma's stomach growled audibly. She looked around, confused and frightened. "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. She walked slowly through the room, dripping melted snow onto the clean floor. The cabin felt occupied, lived in, but there was no one here. She checked the small bedroom visible through an open door. The bed was made with a patchwork quilt. Children's toys sat on a shelf, a wooden horse, a rag doll, a set of blocks, but no people. In the kitchen area, pots hung from hooks. The stove was an old cast-iron thing, the kind Emma had only seen in movies, and on that stove sat a pot of soup, clearly the source of the bowl on the table. It was like someone had just stepped out and would be back any moment. But Emma couldn't wait. She was so cold she couldn't think straight. Her clothes were soaked through. Her hands and feet screamed with pain as circulation slowly returned. She peeled off her wet coat and hung it near the fire. Pulled off her soaked sneakers and socks. Her feet were an alarming white color, but as the warmth hit them, they turned red and began to throb painfully. Emma moved to the table, picked up the bowl of soup. It smelled incredible. Chicken and vegetables, rich and savory. She knew she shouldn't eat someone else's food. Her father had taught her better, but she was so hungry and so cold. And whoever lived here wasn't here now. She lifted the spoon and took a sip. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Warmth spread through her chest, down into her stomach. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling life return to her frozen body. When the bowl was empty, Emma curled up on the sofa near the fire. The cushions were soft, the warmth intoxicating. Her eyes grew heavy. She knew she should stay awake, should try to figure out where she was, how to get back. But exhaustion pulled at her like a current. Just a few minutes, she thought. Just rest for a few minutes. She closed her eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. While Emma slept in the impossible cabin miles away, David Carter was driving back down the mountain in his truck, his clients successfully dropped off at their hotel. The hunt had been cut short by the incoming storm. They'd managed one day before the weather turned too dangerous. David had tried calling Mrs. Peterson to let her know he was coming back early, but his phone showed no signal this far out. No matter. He'd be there in a couple of hours. He could surprise Emma, take her for that hot chocolate he'd promised. He reached the edge of Pine Ridge just as the storm hit with full force. The wind rocked his truck. Snow pelted the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. David gripped the steering wheel tight, leaning forward to see through the white chaos. He pulled up to Mrs. Peterson's house at 4:45 in the afternoon, though it looked more like midnight. The porch light glowed through the snow. David ran to the door, knocked hard. Mrs. Peterson opened it, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "Oh, thank God," she gasped. "David, "Where's Emma?" he interrupted, that primal father sense already screaming danger. Mrs. Peterson's face crumpled. "I fell asleep. I'm so sorry. I just closed my eyes for a minute, and when I woke up, she was gone. I've looked everywhere. I called the sheriff. They're searching, but the storm—" David didn't hear the rest. He pushed past her into the house, calling Emma's name, checking rooms he knew she wouldn't be in. Her coat was gone, her hat. She'd gone outside, into a blizzard that was already being called the worst December storm in 20 years. His little girl was out there somewhere. David ran back to his truck, Mrs. Peterson calling after him, but he couldn't stop. He drove to the sheriff's office, where Deputy Travis met him at the door. "Mr. Carter, we've got teams searching, but I have to be honest with you. In this weather—" "Where are you looking?" David demanded. "The woods behind Peterson's property. That's where her tracks led before the snow covered them. We've got 4 deputies out there now. Sheriff's coordinating from here." "I'm going out." "Sir, I can't recommend—" "My daughter is out there," David's voice cracked. "I'm going." Travis nodded slowly. "Take a radio. Channel 6. Check in every 15 minutes. David grabbed the radio, grabbed his pack from the truck, and headed into the storm. The search was chaos. He could barely see the deputies' flashlights through the snow. The wind made communication impossible. David screamed Emma's name until his throat was raw, pushed through drifts that came up to his knees, searched behind every tree and under every overhanging branch. Nothing. 4 hours passed. Then 6. The deputies were getting frostbite, had to rotate out. Fresh volunteers came to replace them, despite the conditions. That's what you did in small towns. When a child went missing, you searched. You didn't stop. But as midnight approached, reality set in. No 8-year-old could survive this long in these conditions. Not dressed the way Emma had been, not without shelter. David refused to believe it. He pushed deeper into the woods, farther than anyone else dared go, screaming her name into the void. "Emma, baby, please, where are you?" The wind howled. The snow fell. And somewhere, miles away in a cabin that shouldn't exist, Emma slept peacefully by a fire that never seemed to burn low, while secrets worth $270 million waited patiently in the darkness below her feet. Emma woke to silence. Not the silence of a house where people are sleeping, but the profound, almost sacred quiet of a world buried in snow. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it came flooding back. The storm, the cold, the impossible cabin, the soup. She sat up on the sofa, her heart pounding. Pale morning light filtered through the windows, turning the room soft grey and gold. The fire still burned in the fireplace, though Emma couldn't remember anyone adding logs. Her coat hung exactly where she'd left it, now dry and warm. She stood slowly, her muscles stiff and aching. Her feet still throbbed, but the dangerous white color was gone. She wiggled her toes experimentally. Everything seemed to work. The cabin looked different in daylight. Still beautiful, still impossibly clean, but now Emma could see details she'd missed in her exhausted haze. The photographs on the walls weren't just decorative. They told a story. She moved closer to examine them. The largest frame held a family portrait, a woman, a man, and a small boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old. The photo was old, the colors slightly faded in that way pictures from the 1970s always looked. The woman was beautiful, with dark hair pinned up and kind eyes. The man wore a suit and had a serious expression. But the boy was grinning widely, missing his 2 front teeth. They looked happy, normal, like any family you'd see in a department store photo studio. Other frames held more candid shots. The boy building a snowman, the woman baking in a kitchen, the family standing in front of this very cabin. Though it looked newer in the photo, the logs lighter in color, Emma's attention caught on a smaller frame tucked in the corner. It held a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle behind the glass. The headline read, "Local family still missing after 3 months." She leaned closer, reading the article. Her reading wasn't perfect yet. She was only in 3rd grade, but she could make out most of it. Marcus and Catherine Walsh and their 6-year-old son Thomas disappeared in September of 1973. Authorities continued to search the wilderness areas surrounding Pine Ridge. Marcus Walsh was an executive at First Montana Bank. The family's vehicle was found abandoned on Millstone Road. Foul play is suspected. Emma's skin prickled. Walsh. She looked back at the family portrait. Were these the Walshes? Was this their cabin? But that didn't make sense. This article was from 1973. That was, Emma counted on her fingers, 51 years ago. If they disappeared then, how was the cabin so perfectly maintained? How was there fresh soup on the stove? She walked slowly through the space, looking at everything with new eyes. The furniture was old-fashioned, yes, but not antique old, just outdated. The kitchen had no microwave, no electric appliances except a single lamp. The refrigerator in the corner was one of those rounded models from old TV shows. Emma opened it carefully. Inside were glass bottles of milk, butter wrapped in paper, eggs in a cardboard carton. She picked up the milk bottle. The label read, Pine Ridge Dairy, bottled fresh. She'd never seen milk in a glass bottle except in pictures. She set it back and closed the refrigerator door. In the small bedroom, Emma found more evidence of the past. The toys on the shelf were wooden and simple, a carved horse, a spinning top, a set of painted blocks. On the nightstand sat a children's book, Where the Wild Things Are. Emma knew that book. Her mother had read it to her dozens of times. She picked it up, opened the cover. Written in careful handwriting on the inside page, To Thomas on your 6th birthday. May you always find your way home. Love, Mama and Papa. Thomas, the boy from the article, the missing boy. Emma set the book down gently, her hands trembling. Something terrible had happened to this family. Something that left their cabin frozen in time, preserved like a museum. She returned to the main room and began opening drawers, driven by a curiosity she didn't fully understand. In a small desk by the window, she found more newspaper clippings, all carefully folded and saved. Bank executive missing amid fraud investigation. Federal agents question Walsh's disappearance. Search for missing family enters 2nd week. The articles painted a picture Emma was too young to fully comprehend, but the words fraud, embezzlement, and federal investigation appeared again and again. Marcus Walsh had discovered something at the bank where he worked, something bad enough that he'd taken his family and run, and then they'd vanished. Emma was about to close the drawer when she noticed something else tucked in the back, a woman's handwriting on loose pages, like diary entries. September 10th, 1972. Marcus came home today looking like he'd seen a ghost. He says he found discrepancies in the accounts, millions of dollars moving through shell companies. He thinks it goes all the way to the top. I told him to be careful. I'm scared. Emma flipped to another page. March 3rd, 1973. We're leaving. Marcus met with federal agents, but he doesn't trust them. He says some of the names he found are too powerful, too connected. We're taking Thomas and disappearing until we can figure out who to trust. I'm terrified, but what choice do we have? The last entry made Emma's breath catch. September 8th, 1973. We made it to the cabin. It's remote, safe. No one knows about this place except us. We have enough supplies to last months. Marcus says we just need to wait for the right moment to come forward with the evidence. Thomas is scared, but he's being so brave. My little lion. Whatever happens, I pray he... The entry ended mid-sentence. Emma stared at the unfinished words, her stomach churning. Whatever happened next, Catherine Walsh hadn't had time to write it down. She set the papers back carefully, her mind racing. This wasn't just an old cabin. This was a hiding place, a refuge for a family on the run from something dangerous, and they'd never made it out. Emma walked to the kitchen, suddenly hungry despite her growing unease. She found bread in a wooden box, still soft somehow. Jam in the cupboard. She made herself a piece of toast, eating it slowly while she thought. That's when she noticed the rug. It was positioned oddly in the kitchen, right in the middle of the floor where people would walk. Who puts a rug in the middle of a kitchen? Emma crouched down and lifted the edge. Underneath was a wooden door built into the floor, with iron hinges and a heavy ring for a handle. A root cellar. Emma knew what those were. People used them to store vegetables and canned goods before they had refrigerators and freezers. She pulled on the ring. The door was heavy, but it moved, lifting with a groan of old hinges. Cool air rushed up, smelling of earth and stone. Stone steps led down into darkness. Emma hesitated. Every instinct, every warning her father had ever given her, said not to go down there. Strange, dark basements were exactly the kind of place kids in stories got into trouble. But she was already in a strange cabin in the middle of nowhere. She was already in the story. She found a flashlight in a drawer, clicked it on. The beam was strong and steady. She took a deep breath and started down the steps. The root cellar was larger than she expected. The stone walls stretched into darkness beyond her flashlight beam. The ceiling was low, supported by thick wooden beams. The air was cold but dry. The first things she saw were exactly what you'd expect. Shelves lined with mason jars full of preserved vegetables, peaches, tomatoes. Sacks of potatoes and onions, though these had long since rotted to dust. More shelves held canned goods, Campbell's soup, green giant vegetables, Spam. Emma picked up a can of tomato soup. The label design looked old-fashioned, and the price sticker read 29 cents. She knew soup cost more than that now. Way more. She moved deeper into the cellar, her flashlight sweeping across the shelves. And then she saw them, metal boxes, dozens of them, stacked against the far wall in neat rows. They were grey, industrial-looking, each about the size of a small suitcase. They had latches and locks, though most of the locks hung open. Emma approached slowly, her heart hammering. She set the flashlight down so it illuminated the boxes and reached for the nearest one. The latch clicked open easily. Inside were stacks of money, bundles of bills wrapped in paper bands, hundreds, 20s, 50s. More money than Emma had ever seen in her life, more money than she could imagine. She pulled out one bundle with shaking hands. The bills were old, the design different from the money her dad carried, but they were real, actual cash. She set it down and opened another box. Gold coins. Hundreds of them, gleaming dully in the flashlight beam. And jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, rings, all tangled together in a leather pouch. A third box held papers, official-looking documents with seals and signatures, stock certificates, bonds, things Emma didn't understand but knew were valuable. She opened box after box. They were all the same, cash, gold, papers, valuables. It was like someone had cleaned out a bank and hidden everything down here. Her flashlight beam caught something else, a leather journal sitting on top of the center stack of boxes, positioned carefully like it was meant to be found. Emma picked it up. The leather was soft, worn. On the cover, written in gold lettering, "Emergency cash, do not touch." She opened it to the first page. "If you're reading this, then something has happened to me and Marcus. I pray to God that whoever finds this is honest and good. This money, these assets, they represent everything we could liquidate in the 2 weeks we had before we ran. The total value, if we calculated correctly, is approximately $12 million. Emma's mouth fell open. $12 million. That was more money than existed in the world as far as she was concerned. She kept reading. Marcus discovered a fraud scheme at First Montana Bank that stretched back years. Millions of dollars stolen from pension funds, investment accounts, working people's life savings. The men responsible are powerful. Senator Bradley, Judge Morrison, the bank president himself. Marcus collected evidence, proof of every transaction. But when he tried to report it, we realized they have people everywhere. Police, FBI, even the federal prosecutors. We didn't know who to trust. The handwriting grew more frantic. So we ran. We withdrew everything we could, turned it into cash and assets they couldn't trace. We came here, to the cabin Marcus's grandfather built, the one no one knows about. The plan was to wait until we could find someone uncorrupted, someone who would listen. But time is running out. They're looking for us. I can feel it. What happens next will reveal a truth buried for half a century, expose the most powerful people in Montana, and prove that sometimes the smallest voice can uncover the biggest secrets. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Emma flipped ahead several pages, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped the journal. September 21st, 1973. We heard vehicles on the old logging road today. They're getting closer. Marcus says we have to move again, go deeper into the mountains. But Thomas is sick, running a fever. I can't drag him out into the cold. I won't. September 23rd, 1973. Marcus went for supplies. He should have been back hours ago. It's dark now. Thomas is asking for his papa. I don't know what to tell him. September 24th, 1973. Marcus hasn't come back. I heard gunshots last night, far away but distinct. I'm writing this by candlelight while Thomas sleeps. If something has happened to Marcus, if they've found us, I need whoever reads this to know. The evidence is hidden in the cabin's chimney, wrapped in oilcloth. The names, the transactions, all of it. The money in this cellar is dirty, stolen from the people these men robbed. It should go back to them, to their families. If we don't survive... The entry stopped there. The rest of the page was blank. The rest of the journal was empty. Emma felt tears streaming down her face. Catherine Walsh never finished that entry. Whatever happened next had happened too fast for her to write it down. She thought of the photographs upstairs. The happy family. Little Thomas with his missing front teeth. Catherine, who called him my little lion. Marcus, who'd tried to do the right thing. They'd died for it. She was sure of that now. They'd died trying to expose powerful men who stole from ordinary people. And they'd left everything behind, hoping someone would finish what they started. Emma looked around the cellar at the boxes and boxes of money. $12 million in 1973. How much would that be worth now? She didn't know exactly, but she knew it was more. Way more. And somewhere in the chimney upstairs was evidence that could bring down the people who killed this family. Emma's hands were still shaking, but something else was building inside her now. Not fear, something stronger. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory again. You're my brave girl. She gathered up the journal and climbed back up the stone steps. In the main room, the fire still burned. Emma approached the fireplace, her eyes scanning the stonework. There. On the left side, about 4 feet up, one of the stones sat slightly proud of the others. She pressed it. Nothing happened. She tried pulling it. The stone shifted, then slid out, revealing a dark space behind. Emma reached inside and felt oilcloth, just like Catherine had written. She pulled it out carefully. Inside the wrapping was a thick folder full of papers, photographs, and what looked like accounting ledgers. She spread them out on the table, trying to make sense of them. There were pictures of men in suits shaking hands, documents with highlighted sections showing money transfers, lists of names with dollar amounts beside them. Emma couldn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. These men had stolen from people. From families like hers, people who worked hard and saved money and trusted the bank to keep it safe. And when someone tried to stop them, they'd killed him. They'd killed his whole family. Except they hadn't found the evidence. They hadn't found the money. And somehow, 51 years later, an 8-year-old girl, lost in a blizzard, had stumbled into their greatest secret. Emma gathered everything carefully, the journal, the documents, her heart pounding with the weight of what she'd discovered. She knew she needed to tell someone. Her dad, the sheriff, someone who could do something with this information. That's when she heard it. A distant thumping sound, rhythmic and mechanical. She ran to the window. Through the trees, between gaps in the branches, she saw it. A helicopter flying low, searching. They were looking for her. Emma's heart leapt. She'd been so caught up in the cabin's secrets she'd almost forgotten. Her dad must be terrified. Mrs. Peterson must have called for help. They'd been searching all night. She grabbed her coat, now dry and warm, and ran outside. The cold hit her like a wall, but the storm had passed. The sky was a brilliant blue, painful to look at. Snow covered everything in a pristine blanket that sparkled in the morning sun. The world looked clean, new, impossibly beautiful. Emma ran into the clearing in front of the cabin, waving her arms over her head. "Here, I'm here, help!" The helicopter was maybe half a mile away, moving in a grid pattern. She jumped up and down, screaming until her throat hurt. The helicopter continued on its path. It hadn't seen her. Emma's heart sank. Then she had an idea. She ran back into the cabin and grabbed the brightest thing she could find, a red blanket from the bedroom. She ran back outside and waved it like a flag, the crimson fabric stark against the white snow. The helicopter turned. It had seen her. Emma kept waving, crying now, relief flooding through her. The helicopter came closer, its rotors kicking up snow in great swirling clouds. It circled once, twice, then she heard voices, distant shouts. Through the trees, she saw them. Search and rescue teams, orange jackets bright against the snow, and leading them, running faster than she'd ever seen him move, was her father. "Daddy!" Emma screamed. "Daddy, I'm here!" David Carter crashed through a snowdrift and fell to his knees, his arms opening wide. Emma ran to him, and he caught her, lifting her off the ground, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. He was crying. She'd never seen her father cry before, not even at Mama's funeral. "Emma? Oh, God! Emma, baby, I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought I'd lost you." "I'm okay, Daddy. I found a cabin. I was warm. I'm okay." Other rescuers arrived. Someone wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders. Someone else was checking her pulse and her temperature. The helicopter landed in the clearing, its blades still spinning. David pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands cupping her face. His eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Where were you? How did you find shelter?" "The cabin," Emma pointed back through the trees. "It's right there. Daddy, there's something inside you need to see, something important." David wasn't listening. He was checking her hands, her feet, making sure she was really okay. A paramedic knelt beside them, doing the same examination. "No signs of frostbite," the paramedic said. "Temperature is normal. She's incredibly lucky." "Daddy, please," Emma insisted. "The cabin. There are things inside, important things." "It's okay, Bug. You're in shock. Let's just get you home." "I'm not in shock." Emma's voice rose. "There's a family that died, the Walshes, from 1973, and there's money in the cellar, lots of money, and papers about bad people who stole from the bank. Catherine said if someone found it, they should use it to do what she couldn't. Daddy, you have to believe me." David exchanged a glance with the paramedic, who gave him a sympathetic look. "Trauma," the look said. "Hypothermia, hallucinations. Happens sometimes." "Okay, sweetie," David said gently. "We'll check it out. But first, let's get you looked at by a doctor, okay?" "You don't believe me." "I believe you found a cabin. I believe you survived. That's what matters right now." Emma felt frustration rising in her chest. She pulled away from her father and started walking back toward the cabin. "I'll show you. It's right through these trees." David followed, the paramedic and several other rescuers trailing behind. They walked maybe 20 yards. The cabin should have been right there. Emma had just run from it moments ago, but there was nothing, just trees and snow and more trees. Emma stopped, her heart sinking. "It was right here. I swear it was right here." David put a hand on her shoulder. "Emma, honey." "I'm not making it up." Tears streamed down her face. "There was a cabin, with a fire and soup and a family's pictures, and a root cellar with boxes of money. It was real." One of the rescuers, an older man with a graying beard, spoke up quietly. "There's an old legend about a cabin out here, supposed to appear to lost travelers, keep them safe. My grandfather used to tell stories about it, said it saved his life once during a storm back in the 50s. Another rescuer scoffed. "Come on, Henry, that's just a campfire tale." "Maybe," Henry said, "but folks have been telling that story for 70 years, and this little girl survived a blizzard that should have killed her. She survived somehow." David wasn't interested in legends. He lifted Emma into his arms, even though she was getting too big for it. "Let's go home, Bug. We'll sort everything out later." Emma rested her head on her father's shoulder as they walked back to the helicopter. She could feel the journal still tucked in her coat pocket, where she'd shoved it when she ran outside. She could feel the reality of it pressing against her ribs. The cabin was real. The Walshes were real. The money was real. And somehow she was going to prove it. They lifted off in the helicopter, and Emma watched the snow-covered forest fall away below them. Somewhere down there, hidden by trees and time and maybe something else, something unexplainable, was a cabin full of secrets, a cabin that had saved her life and given her a mission. As they flew toward town, toward warmth and safety and hot chocolate and medical exams, Emma's hand closed around the journal in her pocket. She hadn't imagined it. And she was going to make sure Catherine Walsh's story and her sacrifice finally meant something, even if no one believed her yet. The Pine Ridge Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Emma sat on an examination table while a doctor she'd never met shined a light in her eyes and asked her to follow his finger. Her father stood in the corner, arms crossed, looking like he hadn't slept in a week, which he probably hadn't. Pupils responsive, the doctor said, making notes on a clipboard. Temperature normal, blood pressure good, no signs of frostbite, which is frankly miraculous given the conditions. He looked at David. Your daughter is incredibly lucky, Mr. Carter. Most people don't survive a night in those conditions. She found shelter, David said quietly. The doctor glanced at Emma, then back to David. Right, the cabin. His tone was carefully neutral, the way adults sound when they're humoring a child. Emma's jaw tightened. She pulled the journal from her coat pocket and held it up. This is from the cabin. It's Catherine Walsh's journal from 1973. It's real. You can touch it. The doctor smiled gently. Emma, sometimes when we're in extreme stress, our minds can... I'm not making it up. Emma's voice rose. The cabin was real. The journal is real. And there's $270 million in a root cellar that needs to go back to the people it was stolen from. The number just came out. Emma had done the math in her head on the helicopter ride, adding up all the boxes, estimating their contents, multiplying by how much her dad said old money was worth compared to now. 270 million seemed about right. David moved to her side, put a hand on her shoulder. Bug, let's just... No, Emma jerked away. You're not listening. None of you are listening. Catherine Walsh died trying to expose bad people who stole from families like ours. People who work hard and save money and trust the bank. And she left everything behind so someone could finish what she started. That someone is me. Her voice cracked on the last word. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were frustration, anger at being dismissed, at being treated like a confused child when she knew what she'd seen. David knelt in front of her, his eyes searching her face. For the first time since they'd found her, really looked at her. You really believe this, don't you? I don't believe it, Daddy. I know it. The journal is right here. Read it. David took the leather-bound book from her hands. His eyebrows rose as he felt the weight of it, the age of it. He opened to the first page and began to read Catherine Walsh's careful handwriting. His face changed. The skepticism faded, replaced by something else. Shock, concern, fear. He flipped through several pages, reading quickly. Then he looked up at the doctor. Can we have a minute? The doctor nodded and stepped out. David sat on the examination table beside Emma, the journal open in his lap. Emma, where exactly did you find this? In the cabin, in the root cellar. There are boxes and boxes of money down there, Daddy, and gold, and papers about the fraud, and in the chimney there's more evidence, pictures and documents that prove what Marcus Walsh found. And you're certain about the location? Emma hesitated. I know where I was when the helicopter found me. The cabin was right there, through the trees, but when we walked back it was gone. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Sheriff Mullins, it's David Carter. I need you to meet me at the medical center as soon as you can. No, Emma's fine. But there's something you need to see. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Tom Mullins walked into the examination room. He was in his late 50s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors. He'd been sheriff of Pine Ridge County for the past 18 years and had known David since David was a teenager. "What's this about, David?" he asked, then looked at Emma. "And I'm glad to see you safe, little miss. You gave us quite a scare." David handed him the journal. "Emma found this yesterday, in a cabin she took shelter in. I think you should read it." Sheriff Mullins took the journal skeptically, but like David, his expression changed as he read. He sank into the chair, flipping through pages, his face growing pale. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. Then, remembering Emma was there, "Sorry, sweetheart. But if this is real—" "It's real," Emma said firmly. The sheriff looked at her. "You said you found this in a cabin. Can you show us where?" "I can show you where I was when the helicopter found me. The cabin was right there. I swear it was." Sheriff Mullins nodded slowly. "All right, let's go take a look. David, you up for this?" David looked exhausted, but he nodded. "If Emma says there's something out there, I believe her." They assembled a small team. Sheriff Mullins, 2 deputies, David and Emma. They flew back out in the same helicopter, Emma directing them to the clearing where she'd been found. The pilot sat down in the same spot as before. The snow was still pristine, except for the tracks from the earlier rescue. Emma jumped out and pointed. "Through those trees, maybe 20 or 30 yards. That's where it was." They walked in the direction she indicated. Emma's heart pounded. What if the cabin really was gone? What if she'd been hallucinating? What if the journal in the sheriff's hands was the only proof she hadn't imagined everything? They pushed through the trees and Emma stopped dead. There it was. The cabin stood exactly where it had been, solid and real in the afternoon light. Smoke still curled from the chimney. "Well, I'll be damned," Sheriff Mullins said softly. Emma felt vindication surge through her. "See? I told you." They approached cautiously, the sheriff in the lead. He knocked on the door, identified himself. No answer. He tried the handle. It opened. Inside, everything was exactly as Emma remembered. The fire crackling, the photographs on the walls, the bowl of soup still on the table. The deputies fanned out, checking the bedroom, looking in closets. "Sheriff, you need to see this," one of them called from near the fireplace. They'd found the loose stone, the evidence hidden in the chimney. "And there's more," Emma said. She led them to the kitchen, pulled back the rug, and opened the root cellar door. Sheriff Mullins descended first, his flashlight sweeping across the shelves. Emma heard him suck in a breath. "Get the camera down here, now!" For the next 3 hours, they documented everything. The boxes of cash, each bundle photographed and counted. The gold coins, catalogued carefully. The bonds and stock certificates, sealed in evidence bags. The documents hidden in the chimney, every page photographed multiple times. By the time they finished, the sun was setting and the temperature was dropping fast. Sheriff Mullins sat at the cabin's small table, his head in his hands. "This is bigger than me," he said quietly. "This is bigger than all of us." One of the deputies looked at the names on the documents spread across the table. "Sheriff, that's Judge Morrison's father. And Senator Bradley, he's still alive, still in office. And look at this one. Thomas Pierce. That's the mayor's grandfather." "I know," Sheriff Mullins said, "which means this is going to get very complicated, very fast." David put a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "What do we do?" "We call the FBI," the sheriff said, "and we keep this quiet until they get here. If the wrong people find out what Emma discovered—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The FBI arrived the next morning. 2 agents in dark suits and serious expressions. Agent Patricia Reeves and Agent Michael Chen. They set up operations in the sheriff's office and began the painstaking process of verifying everything. Meanwhile, word had started to spread. Small towns don't keep secrets well, and too many people had been involved in the rescue. By day 3, reporters started arriving from Billings, then Great Falls, then from as far away as Seattle and Denver. The story was irresistible. 8-year-old girl lost in blizzard finds mysterious cabin, discovers evidence of 50-year-old fraud worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Emma became famous overnight. Camera crews camped outside their rental house. David stopped answering his phone because it rang constantly. A producer from a national morning show offered them $10,000 for an exclusive interview. David turned them all down, but Sheriff Mullins convinced him to do one press conference, controlled, with Emma protected, just to get the basic story out. Emma sat at a folding table in the community center, microphones clustered in front of her like a bouquet of metal flowers. Her father sat on one side, Sheriff Mullins on the other. Camera flashes popped like fireworks. A reporter from the Billings Gazette asked the first question. "Emma, can you tell us what it was like being lost in the storm?" Emma spoke quietly but clearly. "I was really scared. It was so cold and I couldn't see anything. I thought I was going to die." "And then you found the cabin?" "Yes, it had warm lights and smoke from the chimney. The door was open." "What was inside?" "A family's whole life, pictures and toys and journals. It was like they'd just stepped out for a minute, but they'd been gone for 51 years. A reporter from CNN leaned forward. "You found a journal that mentioned fraud at First Montana Bank. Can you tell us what it said?" Sheriff Mullins intervened. "Those details are part of an ongoing federal investigation. Next question." A local reporter Emma recognized from the Pine Ridge paper spoke up. "Emma, what do you think should happen to the money you found?" This was the question Emma had been waiting for. She looked directly at the cameras. Catherine Walsh wrote that the money came from people these bad men stole from. Working people who saved their whole lives. She wanted it to go back to them, to their families. That's what should happen. I don't want it. My dad doesn't want it. We just want to finish what Catherine started. The room erupted with questions, but Sheriff Mullins stood. "That's all for now. Thank you." As they left through the back door, David squeezed Emma's shoulder. "You did good, Bug." But outside, the real world was waiting. 3 days after the press conference, a lawyer showed up at their door. His name was Gerald Whitmore, and he represented something called the Morrison Family Trust. "My clients are concerned about the provenance of the materials discovered in the cabin," he said, standing on their porch in a $1,000 suit. "They believe there may be competing claims to those assets." "Your clients are the family of one of the men who stole the money in the first place," David said. Whitmore's smile was sharp. "Alleged theft, never proven, never even formally charged. My clients have a legitimate interest in protecting their family's reputation." "By trying to bury the truth?" Emma said from behind her father. Whitmore looked at her with cold eyes. "Young lady, you've stumbled into matters you don't understand. Adult matters, legal matters. I'd advise your father to accept the settlement we're offering and move on with your lives." "What settlement?" David asked. $500,000. Cash. In exchange for your agreement to relinquish all claims to the discovered materials and to cease making public statements about this matter." "That's a bribe," David said. "That's a fair offer to compensate you for your time and trauma." "Get off my property." Whitmore's expression hardened. "I'm trying to help you, Mr. Carter. The people I represent have significant resources and influence. This doesn't have to become unpleasant." "It's already unpleasant. Now leave before I call the sheriff." After Whitmore left, David locked all the doors and windows. That night, Emma heard her father on the phone with Agent Reeves, reporting the attempted bribe. But the intimidation didn't stop there. Someone slashed the tires on David's truck, twice in 1 week. The rental agency called to say their lease was being terminated early, no explanation given. David's guiding business dried up overnight, every single client cancelling. Then came the night someone threw a brick through their front window. Emma woke to the sound of shattering glass. She ran to her father's room to find him already up, phone in hand, calling 911. The brick had landed in the middle of their living room, a note tied to it with string. "Stop digging, or the next one goes through your daughter's window." That's when David made the decision. They couldn't stay in Pine Ridge, not until this was over. Agent Reeves arranged for them to stay in a safe house in Missoula, 3 hours away. They left in the middle of the night, taking only what they could fit in 2 suitcases. The safe house was a small apartment above a laundromat. Emma missed her room, her things, her normal life, but she understood why they had to hide. "Are we in danger?" she asked her father one night. David wanted to lie, to tell her everything was fine. But Emma deserved the truth. Some people are scared of what you found, scared that their family's secrets will come out. But the FBI is protecting us, and we're doing the right thing. Catherine died doing the right thing. I know, but we're not going to die. I promise you that. While they hid in Missoula, the investigation was exploding. Agent Reeves kept them updated with phone calls every few days. The fraud was even bigger than Catherine's journal had indicated. Marcus Walsh had uncovered a scheme that stretched back to the 1950s. It involved not just bank fraud, but land deals, pension theft, embezzlement from county funds, millions of dollars stolen over decades from hundreds of families. The evidence hidden in the cabin was a gold mine. Photographic proof of meetings between bank officials and county commissioners, ledgers showing the flow of money, signed documents proving complicity. "We've assembled a grand jury," Agent Reeves told David. "We'll be filing federal charges within the month." "Against who?" "Everyone involved who's still alive. Judge Morrison's estate may face civil suits. Senator Bradley is looking at racketeering charges. The current bank president's grandfather was the architect of the original scheme, so there may be legal exposure there too. And at least a dozen other families with significant assets that can be traced back to the stolen money." How did they keep this quiet for so long? Power. Money. And they killed anyone who got too close. Agent Reeves paused. "We found evidence that Marcus Walsh wasn't the first person to discover the fraud. There were 3 others over the years. All of them died in accidents, car crashes, hunting mishaps. One ruled a suicide that obviously wasn't." David's blood ran cold. "And Catherine?" "We're still trying to determine exactly what happened to the Walsh family, but we have a lead we're following up on. I'll let you know when we have more." 2 weeks after they'd fled to Missoula, Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table when her father's phone rang. It was Agent Reeves, but her voice sounded different, excited. "David, we found him. We found Thomas Walsh." Emma's pencil stopped mid-word. "The boy from the cabin?" David asked. "He's 57 years old now, living in Portland, Oregon under the name Thomas Harper. We ran DNA against samples from Catherine Walsh's mother, who's still alive, 96 years old in a nursing home. It's a match. We found him." "Does he know what happened to his family?" "That's what we need to find out. He's agreed to meet with us, and he wants to meet Emma." 3 days later, Emma and David flew to Portland. Agent Reeves met them at the airport and drove them to a small house in a quiet neighborhood. The trees were different here, tall firs instead of pines, and rain fell in a soft mist. A man answered the door. He was average height, with grey in his hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like a teacher or maybe a librarian. Normal. Ordinary. He looked at Emma, and tears immediately filled his eyes. "You found our cabin," he said softly. "Are you Thomas?" Emma asked. "I haven't been Thomas in a very long time, but yes, that's who I was." He stepped aside. "Please come in." They sat in his living room, drinking tea Thomas made for them. The house was neat, filled with books and plants. Photos of Thomas with a woman and 2 grown children sat on the mantel. "I have a family," Thomas said, following Emma's gaze. "A wife, 2 kids who are in college now. They know I'm adopted, but they don't know the whole story. No one does. Until now." "What happened to your parents?" Emma asked quietly. Thomas was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was distant, like he was seeing things from 51 years ago. "My father went for supplies. He was careful, always careful, but someone must have followed him. I heard the gunshots from the cabin. I was only 6, but I knew what they meant. My mother knew too." He took a shaky breath. "She woke me up in the middle of the night. She was crying but trying to be brave for me. She said we had to leave, that bad men were coming. We ran into the woods. It was September. Not as cold as winter, but cold enough. We ran for hours. I remember my legs hurting so badly." Tears streamed down his face now. "We found a small cave, more like a hollow under some rocks. My mother made me hide inside. She said she'd lead them away and come back for me. She gave me her coat even though she was freezing. She told me I was her little lion, that I had to be brave. She said if she didn't come back by morning, I should find the old logging road and follow it to town. She never came back, Emma whispered. Thomas shook his head. I waited for 3 days. I was so hungry, so scared. Finally, I did what she said. I followed the road. A logging crew found me, half dead from exposure and dehydration. But I was too terrified to tell them who I was. I thought the bad men would find me. So I pretended I couldn't remember anything. I said I didn't know my name or where I came from. They put me in the foster system. Eventually, a kind couple in Oregon adopted me. I never told anyone the truth. I was too afraid. And as I got older, the fear became part of me. I convinced myself that maybe I had imagined it all, that maybe it was trauma making me remember things that never happened. But it did happen, Agent Reeves said gently. I know that now. Thomas looked at Emma. When the agents told me about you, about what you found, it all came flooding back. Every detail. My mother's voice, my father's laugh, the cabin, the boxes in the cellar. I knew it was all real. Emma pulled something from her backpack. The photograph from the cabin, the family portrait. She handed it to Thomas. He took it with trembling hands and broke down completely, sobbing like the lost 6-year-old boy he'd once been. That's us, he choked out. That's my family. Emma moved to sit beside him. She was 8 years old and he was a grown man, but she put her hand on his arm the way her mother used to do for her when she was sad. Your mum saved you, Emma said. She died to keep you safe. That's the bravest thing ever. Thomas nodded, unable to speak. They stayed for hours. Thomas told them everything he could remember, the days leading up to the escape, his father's growing paranoia, his mother's quiet strength, the names he'd overheard in whispered conversations. I remember one name clearly, Thomas said. Senator Bradley. My father said he was the worst of them all, that he'd ordered people killed before and would do it again. Agent Reeves leaned forward. Senator Jonathan Bradley is 89 years old. He's still serving in the Montana State Senate, still one of the most powerful men in the state. He killed my parents, Thomas said, or had them killed. Same thing. With the evidence Emma found, we can prove it. Bank records, photographs, documents your father collected. Combined with your testimony about what you heard as a child, we can build a case. After 51 years, there's no statute of limitations on murder. Thomas looked at Emma again. You saved me. You know that? For 51 years I've been carrying this weight, this fear, this half-remembered nightmare. You proved it was real. You found what my parents died protecting. You gave their deaths meaning. Emma felt tears on her own cheeks now. Catherine's journal said if someone found the evidence, they should finish what she started. I want to do that. I want to make sure the people who hurt your family don't get away with it. Thomas smiled through his tears. You're 8 years old. I know, but that doesn't mean I can't help. No, Thomas said, his voice filled with wonder. I suppose it doesn't. That night, in the hotel room they were staying in, Emma couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, looking out at the rain-soaked streets of Portland. Her father came to stand beside her. You okay, Bug? I keep thinking about Catherine, how she must have felt, knowing she was going to die but hoping someone would find what she left behind. How long she waited in that cave for Thomas. How scared she must have been. David pulled her close. She was a mother. Mothers do impossible things for their children. Emma thought of her own mother, taken so suddenly. Like Mama. Like Mama. They stood in silence for a moment. Daddy, what happens now? Now we go home. The FBI will finish their investigation. Thomas will testify. And the people who did this will finally face justice. What about the money? David smiled. You already said what should happen to it. It goes back to the families it was stolen from. Catherine would like that. I wish I could tell her we found Thomas, that her little lion survived. Maybe she knows, David said. Maybe somehow she does. The next morning, Before they left Portland, Thomas met them at the hotel. He pressed something into Emma's hand, a small wooden horse worn smooth with age. "This was mine," he said. "From the cabin. Agent Reeves recovered it from the evidence. I want you to have it." Emma looked at the toy, remembered seeing it on the shelf in the bedroom. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. You're the one who saved me. You're the one who found the truth. You're braver than I ever was." Emma hugged him, this man who'd been a frightened boy, and felt the circle closing. The lost child finding his way home, the secret revealed, the truth emerging after half a century in darkness. They flew back to Montana the next day. The investigation was moving fast now. Grand jury indictments were coming. Search warrants had been executed on a dozen properties. The media had connected all the dots. The missing family, the fraud, the murder, the cover-up, the incredible 8-year-old girl who discovered it all. But the most powerful people don't go down without a fight, and the fight was just beginning. Senator Bradley held a press conference denying everything. Judge Morrison's grandson filed motions to suppress the evidence. The bank president's lawyers argued the documents were too old to be admissible, but they were forgetting something important. They were forgetting Emma. Now, she might have been 8 years old, but she had the truth on her side. She had Catherine's journal. She had Thomas's testimony. She had the evidence hidden for 51 years. And she had something else. She had the attention of the world. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most power. Sometimes a lost little girl can find more than shelter in a storm. Sometimes she can find justice. The weeks that followed Thomas's revelation moved like a landslide, slow at first, then unstoppable. Emma and David returned to Pine Ridge to find their world completely transformed. The small rental house they'd fled from was no longer available, the landlord having quietly evicted them while they were in protective custody. Their belongings sat in a storage unit on the edge of town. Sheriff Mullins offered them a place to stay, a small apartment above the station, usually reserved for deputies working double shifts. It was cramped and smelled like old coffee and printer toner, but it was safe, and safety, David had learned, was worth more than comfort. Emma went back to school, but nothing was normal anymore. Kids who'd barely noticed her before now stared at her in the hallways. Some treated her like a celebrity, asking for autographs or wanting selfies with the girl who found the treasure. Others avoided her entirely, their parents having worked for families whose names were in Catherine's documents. Mrs. Morrison, Emma's teacher, pulled her aside one day during recess. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Emma shrugged. "Everyone looks at me different now. Fame changes things, even when you don't ask for it. I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to help Catherine finish what she started." Mrs. Morrison smiled gently. "And you did. You're doing something remarkable, Emma. Something brave. Don't let anyone make you feel bad about that." But brave didn't always feel good. Brave often felt lonely. The legal machinery ground forward with bureaucratic slowness. Federal prosecutors assembled their case like master builders constructing a cathedral, one stone at a time, each piece carefully placed, tested, verified. Agent Reeves called with updates every few days. "We've traced the pension fund theft to 1952, she told David during one call. "It started small, a few thousand here and there, but by the time Marcus Walsh discovered it in 1972, they'd stolen over $43 million. Adjusted for inflation and growth those investments should have had, we're estimating total damages at $270 million, just like Emma calculated." How many families were affected? At least 300. Some lost their entire retirement savings. Others lost land that had been in their families for generations. A few lost businesses. The scope of the fraud is staggering. Can you prove it all? With what Emma found? Yes. Catherine and Marcus were meticulous. Every transaction documented, every meeting photographed, every forgery catalogued. They built an airtight case. They just didn't live long enough to present it. David felt his chest tighten. What happened to them? Exactly. Agent Reeves was quiet for a moment. "We found remains. 2 bodies, buried in a shallow grave about 5 miles from the cabin. The dental records match Marcus and Catherine Walsh. Both had been shot, execution style. David closed his eyes. Does Thomas know? We told him this morning. He's devastated, but also relieved to finally know the truth. He's asked to be involved in the prosecution. He wants to testify. Will that be safe? We're taking every precaution. But David, you need to understand something. The people we're going after, they're desperate. Senator Bradley alone has spent over $2 million on lawyers in the past month. They're going to fight this with everything they have. Let them fight. We have the truth. Truth doesn't always win. It did this time. Emma made sure of that. 2 months after Emma found the cabin, the first indictments came down. Federal prosecutors charged Senator Jonathan Bradley with racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and accessory to murder. The news hit Montana like an earthquake. Bradley was 89 years old, a fixture in state politics for over 50 years. His family name was on buildings, scholarships, parks. He'd been photographed with presidents. He was untouchable. Until he wasn't. The day of his arrest made national news. Camera crews from every major network filmed as federal agents led him out of his sprawling estate in handcuffs. He looked small, frail, nothing like the powerful man who'd ordered murders and destroyed lives. But his eyes, when they found the cameras, were still cold. That same day, indictments came for 12 others. The grandson of Judge Morrison, the current president of First Montana Bank, several county commissioners, a former sheriff, and half a dozen lawyers and accountants who'd helped facilitate and hide the fraud over the years. The legal battle that followed was brutal. Bradley's lawyers filed motion after motion, claiming the evidence was obtained illegally, arguing that the statute of limitations had expired, demanding the case be dismissed on grounds of judicial prejudice. They attacked the credibility of the documents, suggested Catherine's journal was a forgery, even tried to argue that Thomas Walsh's identification was unreliable because he'd been only 6 years old at the time. But Agent Reeves and her team were ready for everything. They had forensic analysis proving the age and authenticity of every document. They had bank records that corroborated Catherine's claims. They had testimony from the families who'd been defrauded. And they had Thomas, who stood in front of the grand jury and told his story with quiet, devastating clarity. I was 6 years old, he testified, his voice steady. But I remember my father's fear. I remember my mother's courage. And I remember Senator Bradley's name being spoken in my house with terror. My parents died trying to expose these men. The least I can do is finish what they started. The grand jury returned a true bill on all charges. 3 months after the indictments, the Catherine Walsh Foundation was established. It was Emma's idea, proposed during a meeting with federal prosecutors and the court-appointed administrator handling the recovered assets. The money doesn't belong to me or my dad, Emma said, sitting in a conference room full of lawyers and government officials. She was 9 now, her birthday having passed quietly during the chaos. It belongs to the families it was stolen from. Catherine said so in her journal. That's what should happen. The lead prosecutor, a stern woman named Janet Corrigan, nodded. We agree, but identifying all the victims and their heirs is going to take years. Some of these frauds happened 70 years ago. Many of the original victims are deceased. We need a mechanism to hold and distribute the funds fairly. A foundation, David suggested. Administered by an independent board. Money goes to verified victims and their descendants first. Whatever's left funds programs to help other people who've been victims of financial fraud. Thomas Walsh, who'd flown in from Portland for the meeting, added, and educational programs, scholarships. My parents believed in justice and education. The foundation should reflect that. Over the next weeks, the structure took shape. The Catherine Walsh Foundation for Financial Justice would be funded by the recovered assets. A board of directors would include Thomas, a representative from the FBI, 2 banking oversight experts, and a victim's advocate. Emma, as a minor, couldn't serve on the board, but they created an advisory position for her. She'd have input on scholarship programs and educational initiatives. The foundation's first act was to hire a team of forensic accountants and genealogists to track down the families who'd been defrauded. They published notices in newspapers across Montana. They created a website with documentation of the fraud and instructions for filing claims. The response was overwhelming. Within the first month, over 400 families came forward. Many brought their own evidence, old bank statements showing mysterious withdrawals, land deeds that didn't quite match records, pension documents proving theft. Some told stories passed down through generations about grandparents who'd lost everything and never understood why. One woman, 83 years old, traveled from Spokane to Pine Ridge just to meet Emma. Her name was Dorothy Chen, and she arrived at the sheriff's station on a cold March morning holding a worn photograph. Sheriff Mullins called up to the apartment. "Emma, there's someone here who wants to meet you." Emma came down to find a tiny white-haired woman with bright eyes and tears on her cheeks. "You're Emma," Dorothy said. "The girl who found the truth." "Yes, ma'am." Dorothy held out the photograph. It showed a young couple standing in front of a house, smiling, hopeful. "This is my parents, Raymond and Margaret Chen. They bought a farm in 1961 with their life savings, 20 acres of good land. They worked it for 3 years, built it into something beautiful. Then, in 1964, a man from the bank came and said there'd been a mistake with the deed. The land was already owned by someone else. They had to leave." Emma looked at the photograph, at the young couple's proud expressions. "My father never recovered from that loss," Dorothy continued. "He'd come from nothing, worked his whole life for that land. Losing it broke something in him. He died of a heart attack at 49 years old. My mother always said it was a broken heart, not a broken body, that killed him." "I'm so sorry," Emma said quietly. Dorothy shook her head. "Don't be sorry, be proud. Because of you, I finally understand what happened. It wasn't my father's fault. It wasn't bad luck. It was theft. And the men who stole from my family are finally being held accountable." She took Emma's hands in hers. "You gave my parents justice 60 years too late, but justice nonetheless. Thank you." Emma hugged this stranger, this woman whose family had been destroyed by the same men who'd killed the Walshes, and felt the full weight of what she'd uncovered. It wasn't just numbers in a ledger or names on documents. It was lives, real people's real pain. Stories like Dorothy's multiplied. A man whose grandfather had lost a lumber business. A woman whose mother's pension had vanished overnight. Families who'd lived in poverty because their inheritances had been stolen before they were even born. Each claim was investigated, verified, cross-referenced with the documents from the cabin. It was painstaking work, but by summer the foundation began making payments. The first check went to Dorothy Chen, $320,000, representing the value of her parents' farm, with interest calculated over 60 years. When she received it, she donated half back to the foundation to fund scholarships for immigrant families. "My parents would want that," she said. "They believed in the American dream even after it was stolen from them. This money should help others chase that dream." While the foundation worked through claims, the criminal trial against Senator Bradley and the others moved toward its date in court. The defense tried every delay tactic imaginable, but Judge Hernandez, specially appointed because half the local judges had conflicts of interest, wasn't having it. "This case has waited 51 years, she said during one hearing. "Justice delayed is justice denied. We will proceed on schedule." The trial began on August 15th. The courthouse in Helena was packed with reporters, victims, supporters, and protesters. Some people still believed Bradley was innocent, that this was all a politically motivated witch hunt. Emma and David attended every day they could. Emma sat in the gallery, watching as prosecutors laid out the case piece by piece. They showed the jury Catherine's journal, her careful documentation. They presented the photographs of secret meetings. They walked through the bank records, showing how money was systematically stolen and hidden. Thomas testified on the 4th day. He walked to the stand wearing a simple suit, his hands clasped together to keep them from shaking. He looked at Senator Bradley, who sat at the defense table with perfect posture and an expression of bored contempt. "Do you see the man who ordered your parents' deaths in this courtroom?" the prosecutor asked. Thomas pointed. "Senator Jonathan Bradley." "How do you know this?" Because I heard my father say his name. I was 6 years old, hiding in my room while my parents talked late at night. My father said, "Bradley is the one who'll kill us if we go public. He's killed before." And he was right. Bradley's lawyer objected, called it hearsay, inadmissible. But Judge Hernandez allowed it as a statement of then-present mental state, showing Marcus Walsh's fear and why the family went into hiding. The testimony continued for 3 weeks. Expert witnesses explained the fraud scheme. FBI agents detailed the investigation. Victims told their stories of loss. Emma was called to testify on day 17. She was 9 years old, small for her age, her feet barely touching the floor when she sat in the witness box. The prosecutor, Janet Corrigan, approached gently. "Emma, can you tell the jury what happened on December 19th of last year?" Emma took a deep breath and told her story. Getting lost in the storm, finding the cabin, the soup, the fire, the photographs, discovering the root cellar, finding the journal and the money. She spoke clearly, without exaggeration, just the facts. "What did you do when you found Catherine Walsh's journal?" Corrigan asked. "I read it, and I knew I had to tell someone, because Catherine died trying to get this information out. She left everything behind so someone could finish what she started, and I knew that someone was me." Bradley's lawyer, a man named Garrison, who wore expensive suits and a permanent sneer, cross-examined her aggressively. "Isn't it true, Emma, that you were suffering from hypothermia when you supposedly found this cabin?" "I was cold, yes, sir." "Cold enough to hallucinate?" "I wasn't hallucinating. The cabin was real, the journal was real, the money was real. You can touch it yourself if you want." Some people in the gallery laughed. Judge Hernandez gavelled for quiet. Garrison tried another angle. "Isn't it true your father is struggling financially, that you were about to be evicted from your home?" Emma's eyes narrowed. "Yes." "So you had motivation to fabricate this story, to claim you found treasure?" "I didn't fabricate anything, and we didn't keep the money. It's going back to the people it was stolen from, like Catherine wanted." "But you've become quite famous, haven't you? You've been on television. You're getting attention, opportunities." "I didn't want to be famous. I wanted Catherine's story to be told. I wanted her son to know he was safe. I wanted the bad people who killed his family to be punished." Emma's voice rose slightly. "That's all I ever wanted." The jury watched her with rapt attention. Several members were visibly moved. Garrison, sensing he was losing ground, changed tactics again. "One final question, Emma. You expect this jury to believe that you, a third grader, uncovered a 50-year-old conspiracy that dozens of trained investigators missed?" Emma looked directly at Senator Bradley for the first time. He stared back with those cold eyes. "I didn't uncover it," Emma said quietly. "Catherine and Marcus Walsh uncovered it. They paid for that with their lives. I just found what they left behind, and I made sure it didn't stay buried." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "No further questions," Garrison muttered. The trial concluded in mid-September. Closing arguments took 2 full days. The prosecution painted a picture of decades of systematic theft, murder, and cover-up. The defense argued reasonable doubt, claimed the evidence was circumstantial, suggested that Marcus Walsh might have been the actual criminal, and the cabin evidence was an elaborate fraud. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the courtroom was so packed that people stood in the hallways, pressing against the doors to hear. Emma sat between her father and Thomas, gripping both their hands. The foreman, a rancher from Great Falls, stood. "On the count of racketeering, we find the defendant, Jonathan Bradley, guilty." The courtroom erupted. Judge Hernandez gavelled for order. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty." More chaos, more gavelling. "On the count of accessory to murder, we find the defendant guilty." Senator Bradley's face remained impassive, but his hands trembled on the table. When order was finally restored, Judge Hernandez addressed the defendant. "Mr. Bradley, you've been convicted on all counts. Given the severity of the crimes and your age, I'm remanding you to federal custody pending sentencing. Bail is denied." Bradley was led out in handcuffs. As he passed the gallery, he looked directly at Emma. She met his gaze without flinching. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones were shoved toward Emma, cameras flashed, questions shouted over each other. Thomas stepped forward, his arm around Emma's shoulders. Today, justice was served, not just for my family, but for the hundreds of families who suffered because of these men's greed. My parents died trying to expose this fraud. Emma Carter, at 9 years old, had the courage to finish what they started. She's a hero, the kind this country needs more of. A reporter shouted, "Emma, what do you want to say to the other defendants still awaiting trial?" Emma stepped up to the microphones. The truth always comes out eventually. It might take 50 years, but it comes out. So if you did something wrong, if you hurt people, you should make it right while you still can. Because someone will find out, someone will tell the truth, and you'll have to answer for what you did. The video clip went viral. Within hours, it had millions of views. Emma's words echoed across social media, news broadcasts, even late-night talk shows. But for Emma, the most important moment came later that night, back at the apartment above the sheriff's station. Thomas had stayed in Helena for the verdict, and he came to say goodbye before flying back to Portland. "I'm going to tell my family everything," he said. "My wife, my kids, they deserve to know the truth about where I came from, who I really am." "You're Thomas Walsh," Emma said. "You always were." He smiled. "Yeah, I guess I am." He knelt down to her level. "Thank you, Emma, for giving me my name back, my history, my parents' honor. You gave me everything I thought I'd lost." "You were never lost," Emma said. "You were just hidden, like the cabin, like the truth." They hugged goodbye, and Emma knew she'd see him again. They were connected now, bound by Catherine's sacrifice and a fairy tale cabin that had saved them both. Over the following months, the other defendants fell like dominoes. Faced with the evidence and Bradley's conviction, most pleaded guilty to reduced charges. Only 2 went to trial, and both were convicted. By the time winter came again, a full year after Emma had gotten lost in the snow, all the major players in the fraud scheme had been brought to justice. The Foundation's work accelerated. By December, they'd verified and paid out claims totaling over $180 million. The money went to direct victims and their heirs first, then to programs supporting financial fraud victims, and finally to educational scholarships in Catherine and Marcus Walsh's names. David's life transformed too. The media attention from Emma's story brought unexpected opportunities. A publisher offered him a book deal to tell their story. A production company wanted to option it for a movie. He turned down most of the offers, but he accepted one. A job as a wilderness safety consultant for the National Park Service, teaching search and rescue teams about survival situations. The pay was steady, good, and it came with benefits, including health insurance, something they hadn't had in years. He was able to rent a real house, not an apartment, with a yard where Emma could play. For the first time since Sarah died, David felt like he could breathe. But the biggest change was in Emma herself. The shy, quiet girl who'd lived in her head and her books was still there, but she'd found her voice. She spoke at Foundation events, telling Catherine's story to audiences of hundreds. She testified before the state legislature about pension protection laws. She even appeared on a national morning show, poised and articulate, explaining why truth mattered more than treasure. 1 year to the day after she'd found the cabin, Emma asked her father to take her back to the location. They hiked out with Sheriff Mullins and Thomas, who'd flown in from Portland for the anniversary. The forest was beautiful under fresh snow, quiet and serene. They found the clearing where Emma had been rescued, and there, exactly where it had been, stood the cabin. Thomas stopped, his breath catching. "It's still here." They approached slowly, reverently. The door was unlocked, as always. Inside, everything was exactly as Emma remembered. The fire burning, the photographs on the walls, the family frozen in time. Thomas walked through like a man in a dream. He touched the furniture, the walls, the toys on the shelf in the bedroom. He picked up the book his mother had given him for his 6th birthday and pressed it to his chest, tears streaming down his face. I thought I'd never see this place again. I thought I'd imagined how perfect it was. It's been waiting for you, Emma said. They spent an hour in the cabin. Thomas told stories about his childhood there, the summers his family had spent in the mountains, the happiness before everything fell apart. Sheriff Mullins took photographs, documenting everything. When it was time to go, Thomas stood at the door looking back. Should we lock it? Emma shook her head. Leave it open. Maybe someone else will need it someday. As they walked back through the forest, Emma turned for one last look. The cabin stood warm and welcoming, smoke curling from its chimney, light glowing in its windows. A sanctuary, a secret, a gift left by a mother who died to save her son. Thank you, Emma whispered to the woods, to the cabin, to Catherine's memory. Thank you for saving us both. By the time Emma turned 10, the Catherine Walsh Foundation had become a national model for how to address historical financial fraud. They'd returned over $200 million to victims and their families. They'd funded scholarships for 300 students. They'd helped pass new laws protecting whistleblowers and strengthening oversight of financial institutions. And Emma had become something she never expected, a voice for the voiceless. She received letters every week from people who'd been defrauded, scammed, or stolen from. Some wanted advice. Others just wanted to share their stories with someone who would listen. Emma read every letter, and when she could, she helped. One spring morning, she received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten in shaky cursive. Dear Emma, you don't know me, but I'm 96 years old, and I'm Catherine Walsh's mother. The FBI found me in a nursing home last year and told me what you discovered. They told me about my grandson Thomas, alive after all these years. They told me how you found my daughter's journal and finished what she started. I have no words adequate to thank you. My daughter was brave and brilliant and kind. She died trying to do the right thing. You made sure her death meant something. You saved her son. You brought her killers to justice. You are a remarkable child, Emma Carter. I wish Catherine could have known you. I think you would have been friends. With all my love and gratitude, Eleanor Walsh. Emma carried that letter with her everywhere for weeks. It became her most treasured possession, proof that what she'd done mattered not just legally or financially, but personally, deeply, to the people whose lives had been shattered. She wrote back to Eleanor, and they began a correspondence. Emma would tell her about school, about her father, about the foundation. Eleanor would share memories of Catherine, stories from before the tragedy, glimpses of the woman whose journal had started everything. When Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep 6 months later, she left Emma one final gift. Catherine's wedding ring, a simple gold band with an inscription inside, "Truth and love endure." Emma wore it on a chain around her neck, a reminder of the promise she'd made in that cabin and the family whose sacrifice had changed everything. The following year, on December 19th, the town of Pine Ridge dedicated a memorial. It stood in the center of town square, a bronze statue of a family, a mother, father, and small boy standing together. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In memory of Catherine, Marcus, and Thomas Walsh. They pursued truth at the cost of their lives. May we have the courage to do the same. And in honor of Emma Carter, who found their story and made sure it was told." Emma stood at the unveiling ceremony, now 11 years old, poised and thoughtful beyond her years. Thomas stood beside her, along with David, Sheriff Mullins, Agent Reeves, and dozens of families who'd been helped by the foundation. Emma was asked to speak. She stepped up to the microphone, looked out at the crowd and said, "A year and a half ago, I got lost in a snowstorm. I was scared and cold and thought I was going to die. Then I found a cabin that shouldn't have existed and it saved my life. But it did more than that. It showed me that sometimes the things that seem impossible are actually just hidden, waiting for the right person to find them. Truth is like that. Justice is like that. Hope is like that." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Catherine Walsh didn't live to see her killers punished. She didn't live to see her son grow up safe and happy. She died in the snow trying to protect him, trying to protect the truth. But her story didn't die. It waited, and when the time was right, it was found. Emma looked at the memorial, at the bronze family forever frozen in a moment of hope. This statue isn't just about remembering the past. It's about inspiring the future. It's about teaching us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose courage over comfort, truth over silence. Catherine was a mother and a wife. Marcus was a banker. Thomas was just a little boy. I'm just a kid from Montana who got lost in the woods. But together we changed things. We proved that even 50 years later, justice can still be served. Truth can still win. Her voice grew stronger. So, if you're out there thinking you're too small, too young, too powerless to make a difference, remember this story. Remember that a third grader found what trained investigators missed. Remember that truth buried for half a century still came to light. Remember that fairy tale cabins sometimes exist for real, and they save more than just lives. They save hope. The crowd rose to its feet, applause thundering across the square. But Emma wasn't finished. And if you're out there sitting on a secret, hiding the truth, thinking you'll get away with it forever, remember this too. Someone will find out. Maybe not today, maybe not for 50 years, but truth has a way of surviving. And when it emerges, when someone brave enough and stubborn enough finds it and refuses to let it be buried again, you will answer for what you've done. She stepped back from the microphone. The applause continued, but Emma barely heard it. She was thinking of the cabin, still standing somewhere in those woods, still warm, still waiting, still proof that some stories, no matter how long they're hidden, refuse to stay silent. That evening, after the ceremony and the reception and the endless photographs, Emma and her father drove home through the winter twilight. Snow was falling again, gentle and soft, covering the world in white. "You did good today, Bug," David said. "I just told the truth. That's all Catherine asked for. That's all anyone can do." They pulled into the driveway of their house, the real house with the yard and the working heat, and the security that came from steady income and paid bills. So much had changed in 2 years. Everything had changed. Emma looked at her father, really looked at him. The lines in his face had softened. He smiled more. He laughed. He'd even started dating someone, a kind woman named Rachel, who worked at the library and treated Emma like she was precious. "Daddy, are you happy?" David was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, Bug. For the first time since your mama died, I think I am. You?" Emma thought about it. She thought about Catherine and Thomas and Eleanor. She thought about Dorothy Chen and the hundreds of other families who'd finally received justice. She thought about the cabin in the woods, waiting for the next lost soul who needed saving. "I'm not happy about what happened to the Walshes, or about all the people who got hurt. But I'm happy we could help fix it. I'm happy Thomas got his name back. I'm happy truth won." "That's a good kind of happy," David said. That night, Emma lay in bed, the wooden horse Thomas had given her sitting on her nightstand beside her mother's photograph. She thought about how strange life was, how the worst moments could lead to the best outcomes, how getting lost could mean finding exactly what you needed. She thought about Catherine's ring around her neck, warm against her skin. Truth and love endure. They did. They really did. 2 years later, on Emma's 13th birthday, she received an envelope from the Catherine Walsh Foundation. Inside was a letter and a check. The letter read, "Dear Emma, the Foundation's board has voted unanimously to award you the Catherine Walsh Medal for Extraordinary Courage. This award comes with a $50,000 college scholarship and our eternal gratitude. Additionally, as the Foundation has successfully concluded its primary mission of compensating all verified victims, the remaining funds will be used to endow the Emma Carter Center for Truth and Justice at the University of Montana. The center will train investigative journalists, support whistleblowers, and research historical fraud cases. We hope this honors both the legacy you helped preserve and the courage you showed in doing so." Emma sat on her bed, reading and rereading the letter, a center named after her, Investigators and journalists trained to find truth the way she'd found Catherine's, the work continuing, expanding, touching lives she'd never meet. She thought about the girl she'd been at 8 years old, lost in a snowstorm, following a white rabbit into the woods. She'd been looking for magic, for adventure, for something beyond her small, struggling life. And she'd found it. Not in the way she expected, not in a wonderland or a fantasy kingdom, but in something more powerful, the truth. And in finding it, she'd discovered who she was meant to be. Not just Emma Carter, the girl who survived. Emma Carter, the girl who finished what Catherine started. Emma Carter, the girl who proved that courage doesn't wait until you're ready. Sometimes it just shows up in a blizzard and asks if you're brave enough to follow. Anyone can change the world if they're brave enough to tell the truth, stubborn enough to see it through, and kind enough to honor the sacrifices of those who came before. As the sun rose over Montana on Emma Carter's 13th birthday, she stood at her window, watching snow fall softly on the pines. Somewhere out there, hidden in the wilderness, a cabin still stood warm and glowing, waiting for the next lost soul who needed shelter. And in that cabin, if you knew where to look, you could still find traces of the family who'd sacrificed everything for truth. But Emma Carter wasn't looking backward anymore. She was looking forward, to the center that would bear her name, to the investigators who would follow her example, to the countless other secrets waiting to be uncovered and set free. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that small voices can echo forever, that lost children can find their way home, and that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is a little girl who refuses to let the truth stay buried. The girl who'd once followed a white rabbit into a storm had become the woman who'd lead others toward the light. And the fairy tale cabin that had saved her life had given her something greater still, a purpose, a mission, a story worth living. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a voice, that courage comes in all sizes, and that sometimes the smallest heroes cast the longest shadows.